of Israel, they're out wandering in the wilderness when they see in the distance the mighty army of Pharaoh. Do you know what they do? They complain. It's just amazing. They've heard the story of the burning bush. They've seen the snake, and they've seen the water turn to blood. They've experienced all kinds of plagues. They've gone through the Passover and the death of the firstborn, and yet all of them were saved. And they've gone out in the wilderness. God has promised them, look, I'm with you. I'm going to give you a new land. I'll protect you. I'm going to be your God. You'll be my people. I am fulfilling the covenant to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And no sooner are the children of Israel out of Egypt when what do? They complain. God, weren't there enough graves in Egypt that we could die there? They complain against God. God keeps the Egyptians at bay. The cloud of his presence comes and creates a wall between them and the Egyptians. He tells Moses, I want you to stretch out your rod. And Moses stretches out his rod, and of course the Red Sea parts. And all 2 million of the children of Israel, they cross on dry ground. Of course, they get to the other side. Imagine how long it takes for 2 million people to get across to the other side. And no sooner are they on the other side that God releases the Egyptians, and they start coming also through the Red Sea. When they get into the middle of the Red Sea collapses again, and the Bible tells us that none of the Egyptians escaped. They're all killed. What a great day. Now, can you imagine being with the Israelites when they've seen God work, not only through all the plagues, but then the parting of the Red Sea, and then God coming to their rescue and destroying all the Egyptians, and now they're on their way to the Promised Land. What a great and glorious moment. In fact, Miriam sings out a song of God's greatness. And so here the children are being led to the Promised Land. But I've got to ask you a question. Do you know how long it takes before the children of Israel turn their back on God and start complaining against God? 3 days. 3 days. Can you imagine that? They've seen the plagues. They've seen the dividing of the Red Sea. They're on their way to the Promised Land. It takes them 3 days before they start complaining. God, why'd you bring us out here? They go to a place in the water, there's water there, but the water's not very good. God, you've given us bitter water. They complain against God. God tells Moses, put some wood in that, and God turns the water sweet. And yet, guess what? Within the next 2 weeks, 3 more times, the children of Israel, they complain. The people grumble. God, we're out in the middle of nowhere. There's no water. Why do we have to wander around out here? Why'd we leave Egypt? We could die in Egypt. In fact, we had a pretty good life in Egypt. In fact, we had food in Egypt. And they complain. At Marah, they complain. At Elim, they complain. Well, God finally gives them food to eat. Remember that, right? He gives them food to eat. What is it? What is it? Actually, that's what it's called. What is it? When you say the word manna, it's, what is it? And I've got to say, yeah, that's what it is. The Bible gives us descriptions of what manna is really like. The description the Bible gives us is they were thin flakes like frost. Now, don't get that confused with frosted flakes. They're completely different. It gives us this description. It tastes like coriander seed. That doesn't help me out either. Until it says they taste like wafers made with honey. I think, okay, that sounds good. And here's the instruction God gives them. Look, every morning, you go out and you can collect manna. In fact, here's what you need to do. You need to take up an omer for your family. And I think, great, how much is an omer? Well, just to explain that to you, you need to know that an omer is 1/10 of an ephah. Just to let you know. Actually, it's an amount about 2 quarts. And here's the instruction. Every day, you can go out and you can collect an omer of manna. But don't take any more than that, because if you take more than that, here's what will happen. It will the next day be filled with maggots, and it'll spoil. Not a pretty sight. But guess what? Before the Sabbath, the day before the Sabbath, here's what I want you to do. I will provide it for you every day except on the Sabbath. And so on the day before the Sabbath, what you need to do is you need to go out and collect 2 omers. And that'll provide you not only for Friday, but for Saturday, because I will not give you manna on Saturday. And so here's what the people do. The first day, they go out and guess what they do? They collect all they can. And it turns into maggots. They figured out, okay, the next day we're only going to get the right amount. Until they get to the fifth day, guess what they do on the fifth day? They collect just enough for the fifth day, and on the sixth day, God doesn't provide manna. Guess what the people do? God, why didn't you give us any food? They complain against God. And here's this pattern that we develop. God works, and yet the people complain. They complain about the water. They complain about the manna. They go out and they take too much and it spoils. They take not enough. They complain against God. It's just a couple more days later. They go and say, God, we don't have any water. And they start complaining against water. And God gives them this instruction. Moses, I want you to go and I want you to strike the rock. And out of the rock will pour forth water. And so Moses strikes the rock and water comes forward. And the people are supplied water out of a rock. Guess what? It's just a couple days later that people start complaining. We think, okay, maybe months went by of eating manna. Guess what? It's just a few days. A few days of God providing them manna, and pretty soon the people start complaining about manna. And so what does God do? He gives them quail. You see, here's what the people are doing. They're complaining and complaining and complaining and complaining. We were better off in Egypt. Look, back in Egypt, we had pots of meat from which we could eat. Yeah, we were in slavery, but God, at least we had something to eat. And they keep complaining. And in just a matter of a few weeks, here's what happens. At one point, God is so frustrated with these people that he goes and he literally burns the outside of camp and says, if you guys don't straighten up, that's what I'm going to do to you. And Moses intercedes for them. Finally, as we're out here in the wilderness, God talks to Moses. And he says, look, I'm going to take you up on a mountain, and I'm going to give you some instructions. Take Aaron with you. Tell the people I'm going to meet with you. And so Moses goes out, and he meets with the people and says, God's going to take me up on the mountain. In fact, God has told me this, that you are going to be able to hear his voice. And so God takes Moses up on the mountain, and we usually think as we read this story, okay, maybe this is years into their journey. Guess what? This is the celebration of the third month. They've gone through the Red Sea. They've seen the plagues. God has provided water and manna and quail. And now God's saying, look, I'm going to take Moses up on the mountain. He takes Moses up on the mountain, and on that mountain, the cloud that's been leading them, engulfs the mountain. And there's earthquakes, and there's thunder, and there's lightning, and they hear the voice of God. And so Moses is up on the mountain, and God is saying, here's my law for my people. And God writes out with his own finger what we would call the Ten Commandments. He writes out the Ten Commandments. And of course, we know the Ten Commandments. We know what they're like. God writes these out with his finger. The laws for the people. And so Moses is coming down with tablets, the Ten Commandments. And by the way, the tablets, the Ten Commandments, not only written by God's own hand, the Bible says written on front and back. A little different than how we usually display the Ten Commandments. I guess it's hard to display them if they're written on front and back. But Moses comes down, and what are the children of Israel doing? They have gathered all their gold together. They've melted that in and formed a golden calf. And they're worshiping the calf. 3 months. Do you understand that? 3 months. The anniversary of the third month is when Moses goes up on the mountain. Moses is so infuriated that he comes down and he breaks the tablets. He goes, he grinds up the golden calf and he throws it into the water and he makes the people drink. And God at this point is willing and ready to destroy the Israelites. In fact, he says, Moses, I'm going to start all over again. I'm going to wipe out the people, and from you and your lineage, I will create a people for myself. And Moses at this point intercedes for the people. So God, give them another chance. And so God does. There are 3,000 people that are killed. Everyone gets a type of a plague. But God actually hears the pleading of Moses. And we read these words in Exodus 34. The Lord's a compassionate God, and he's gracious. He abounds in love. And yet, he does not leave the guilty unpunished. God holds back his wrath. Well, the rest of Exodus is actually about the rewriting of the Ten Commandments. This time, Moses has to chisel them out. It's about all kinds of other laws about how God's going to deal with his people. And actually, as we go from Exodus to Leviticus, we find out all those rules and regulations. And so the book of Leviticus is actually commentary on the book of Exodus, the last part of that, about all the instruction God gives to his people. The book of Deuteronomy actually serves also as a type of commentary on the book of Exodus, where we get the second giving of the law. So Leviticus, it's the rules for the tribe of Levi. That's why we call it Leviticus. The book of Deuteronomy, deuteros is the word two, nomos is the word law. The book of Deuteronomy is actually the second giving of the law and describes, okay, Moses had to go back up there. We get the 10 Commandments repeated for us and all these other laws. And so the book of Leviticus and Deuteronomy serve as commentary on the book of Exodus. But the story resumes in the book we call Numbers. The reason why the book of Numbers is called Numbers is because it deals with numbers. I'll just try to explain that for you. Actually, it has two censuses, one coming out of Egypt and one before they get to the promised land, numbering how many people there are. And so we see these great lists, but the story really continues in the book of Numbers. And it starts, and we think, okay, how much time has gone by? Has it been years? Actually, the book of Numbers starts, we get the first anniversary of Passover. And so we're talking about the 1 year anniversary. Think what's happened in that 1 year. We've had the plagues. We've had the parting of the Red Sea. We've got water from rocks and water turned sweet. We've got all kinds of things, including thunder and lightning and the people hearing God's voice. We've had all these miracles. And here it comes time for the 1 year anniversary. They celebrate Passover, the coming out of Egypt. Guess how long it takes for them to start complaining?